Namaste. This is Anuradha Goyal from Detours, and I have with me a very dear friend and a very knowledgeable person today. She's Sumedha Verma Ojha. She's a former IRS officer, and which means she understands economy, she understands taxes, and she has translated Valmiki Ramayana. She has written a thriller, a spy thriller based in Mauryan era, bringing back that era to us when Chanakya was just setting up the Mauryan Empire. I am eagerly waiting for the sequel, which is taking more time than I wanted to take. So I'm hoping it will be out there soon as the lockdowns go. So, Sumedha ji, welcome to Detours. Namaste and welcome to Detours.
Okay, thank you.
So, Sumedha ji, you are an expert on ancient history, and I'm a traveler. And our paths meet at a place where we want to talk about the travels in ancient India. How did people travel? Today most of the tourism and hospitality industry is kind of based on leisure travel and pleasure travel. Yeah, of course there are business travelers, there are people who travel for various other reasons, but the industry basically thrives on leisure and pleasure travelers. So I want to know, what were the primary reasons for which people traveled in ancient India?
Thank you, Anuradha. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this conversation, which I promise you is going to be very interesting. Welcome to all those who are listening to this conversation. And we will, Anuradha and I, as she said, our paths collide where travel and the past meet. So we will tell you very interesting things about travel in the past today. So, why did people travel? Humankind started traveling as a concomitant of existence. So migration was the first travel when people moved their locations to look for better places to stay in, to get access to better resources. But as humankind established itself, what were the reasons why people traveled? So, of course, the very first reason for travel was trade. And because of trade, because people always wanted to exchange things with each other, in the beginning with people who were near them, later with people who were further and further away from them. So the entire system became more and more complex with roads, modes of transportation, places to stay, etc. Trade was a very important reason. And another one, the basic human tendency of aggression, war, and fighting, which was even stronger in the ancient age. So, routes for armies, routes where people could move on so that they could conquer new territory and move on to gather newer resources for themselves. That was another very big reason for traveling.
Which
Then,
is
of
kind
course,
of expanding yourself.
yes. So sometimes it was a benign intention, sometimes it was not. Aggression and war are not always very benign. But yes, the whole, that's how countries, big countries, and our national systems have come into existence.
Even
Another,
gods were aiming to expand themselves.
that's true, that's true, very true. Another reason for travel, for undertaking travel, was of course Tirth Yatras. And especially when we talk in the context of ancient India, Anuradha has been kind enough to call me an expert. I would call myself still a learner, a student. But the area of ancient India where I focus on, Tirth Yatras were very important. And that's a separate and very important and interesting issue in itself. Anuradha has done a lot of work on that. People traveled to visit the Tirths. Tirth has a very complex and very multifaceted meaning. One meaning, of course, is a place of religious importance. So people used to visit places of religious importance. another reason for traveling in ancient India was those who we can call, knowledge travelers. People traveled from ashram to ashram, from rishi to rishi, to gain information, to gain knowledge, to also get peer review of their own theories and their own systems of knowledge and their own grunts that they composed.
And
This
also
was
our universities were kind of spread out across the country.
universities were spread out, and remember, the system was not so much of universities but of ashrams.
Right.
And these ashrams were often in very inaccessible places because they were supposed to be away from the hustle and bustle of daily life. So
Mm-hmm.
they were in slightly in places away from the city, sometimes in the forests, near the rivers.
Mm-hmm.
And the people traveled from ashram to ashram. This was a very, very important reason for traveling. And another important thing which we sometimes miss, we tend to think of ancient India as a very serious place, but no, there was a lot of fun entertainment going on. So Natya Mandalis
Mm-hmm.
undertook a lot of travel, and there are amusing and amazing stories about travels by Natya Mandalis and how people used them to send messages to people they wanted to speak to, or to look for people who they had lost. So, in a nutshell, so we have migration, trade, fighting, that is armies, we have knowledge sharing, and we have Tirth Yatras, and we also have these Natya Mandalis traveling. The leisure and pleasure aspect of travel
Mm-hmm.
was very small, but there are certain tiny mentions of leisure and pleasure travel. And if you could think of cruises as leisure and pleasure travel, they have been mentioned in the Arthashastra with great prominence. So perhaps that is, we should not think that they did not travel for leisure, but certainly not in the way it is now, when we travel mostly for leisure unless it's business travel.
Right. So this ashram to ashram travel seems like the retreats of today, something like a retreat when you go there to kind of disengage with the common world, uh,
A seminar. I would tend to think of it as a seminar where people,
conferences and seminars.
yes, more like conferences and seminars. Then you had the kings who patronized these scholars, very famous kings. For example, Raja Janak. He
Mm-hmm.
was a famous scholar king, and his the shastrarts that he organized were absolutely famous. And from there have emerged things that, for example, you read the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
Right.
So a part of it happened in Raja Janak's court. So people travel to go to these conferences also, and then students, of course, traveled to go to Gurukuls. Students traveled to go to the few universities that were there. So this was all knowledge travel. But we must remember that the main reason, the biggest thing why travel was undertaken in the past was trade. Trade and trade routes are kind of the veins and arteries of the body politic of the past. That's how they survived.
We are going to
And
bring you back for a focus session on trade routes only. But it's very interesting that you mentioned these Natya Mandalis traveling, because I did a post on the best professions to pick up if you love traveling. And I had actually put performing artist as one of the professions. If you are a performing artist, you get to travel to the remotest part of the world, and you get to showcase your art, carry your culture, and still travel the world.
yes,
So it's good to know that we are carrying forward a thread which used to exist
a
2000
very
years ago.
of actors and actresses and jesters, acrobats, performers of all kinds, singers who traveled, and not only in the bigger places, not only in the urban areas, but also in the smaller towns and smaller villages.
Right. So that brings me to the next question. How do you get this information about how people traveled in ancient India? What are our sources? Which are the texts which tell us about this?
So that's a good question. I agree that it is a bit of a abstruse and serious question. So I will answer it in short because it's something that mostly only people who wish to do very deep research go into, but I feel anybody who
Mhm.
listens to information on anything should know where it's coming from, so that they can have some degree of assurance about what we are speaking of. So what are the sources? One is, of course, archaeological remains. There are people who have done a lot of work on the trade routes of ancient India, of course, in other parts of the world also, but of ancient India. And they have analyzed remains of the things that were traded. They have analyzed the paths that were made, the trade routes that were made, and they have also, through this, built up and told us where exactly those trade routes went, what kind of cities and settlements were there, what kinds of things were exchanged. So archaeological remains are one big source. Another very big source is, of course, numismatics. That means coins, which we have found in different places, and they have also been analyzed to give us much information on travel in the past and trade in the past. A third thing is inscriptions. And I hope, Anuradha, that if we continue this series, I will be able to discuss some very interesting inscriptions relating to travel, and which have been found in various places, and which give us such tiny little deep insights into what people actually were like, that it's like a flash of suddenly knowing someone from the past.
Can
It's
you
like
share
a
one
flash.
example with us?
Sorry, what was that?
Can you share one example with us?
Well, okay, I can share an example with you, and we will hopefully, do a program on
Yes,
this.
yes, we will.
There was a very famous religious and spiritual guru who was called Makardhwaj Yogi.
Mhm.
Now, Makardhwaj Yogi used to live in the first millennium before the Common Era. And he had a band of travelers, he had a band of followers who traveled with him wherever he went.
Mhm.
And wherever they went, they have left small inscriptions about themselves. And
Mhm.
today we can find those inscriptions sometimes in a museum in Bangladesh,
Mhm.
or a small little village in India. And the interesting thing is, Anuradha, that amongst these travelers who followed him because they believed in him, most of them were women.
Wow.
So, and then there is another a very interesting inscription, because it is interpreted in two different ways. This is in the Ramgarh caves. So, some people say it is the first love inscription in the world, which is of a man who was languishing for a courtesan called Sutanuka. Other people have interpreted that place as being a rest house for women travelers.
Is the Jogimara
So, through
inscription?
inscription, I can't hear you, Anuradha.
Wait. Is this the Jogimara inscription?
Yes, that's a Jogi Bara inscription.
Mhm.
And of course, the earlier interpretation was that it was a theater, but
Mhm.
there has been a fresh reinterpretation, which, well, I will tell you about it, and you can make up your own mind that it was a rest house for travelers. So, these little inscriptions suddenly give you an insight, and you feel as though you know the people that you're talking about. This is what part of what makes it fun to be a historian.
The traveler.
Yes. So I was talking about inscriptions, and then, of course, mainly we get our information from compositions. Compositions in Sanskrit, Prakrit, and Tamil, and other cognate languages. Sanskrit plays.
Mhm.
Then are three big story complexes: the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and the Badkaha. The Badkaha is a complex of stories which was composed around possibly the 6th or 7th century before the Common Era, and it is a storehouse of information about society of that time. It is from the Badkaha that most of the Jatak tales have been taken. So we base ourselves on stories written by the Jains and the Buddhists. So the Jatak tales are another very big and fecund source of information about travel. And I hope that in this program itself, I will have the opportunity to tell you about a particular section from the Ramayana, which is in fact actually a travel log. of the travels of Sri Ram through the country. And so many of his routes have been traced, and so many of those places have been traced. And we also get to know about the nuts and bolts of travel, how boats were made, how roads were made, etc. And hopefully, as we go on talking, I will be able to give you some specifics about a couple of incidents, because of course we can't go further than that.
My next curiosity is about the modes of transportation. Did they have roads like we have expressways and highways and roads, or what kind of vehicles they had? How did they travel? So I want to know about the travel infrastructure, as we call it today.
Yes. So we, of course, did not start with roads.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Roads came to be in later times, if we think about the dawn of human civilization. But remember, water was always there.
Right.
So waterways have come before roadways, because human beings discovered how to make boats much before they did anything else. And you can show those inscriptions from some of the Indus Valley seals, which show you what kind of boats were there and how they were made. So waterways, with the infrastructure of boats, ships, navigators, navigation instruments, etc., have all been mentioned not just in the Rig Veda but also in the Jatak Katha. So in the Rig Veda, interestingly, although it is said, I don't know why, by classical historians, that there was no sea travel, or there was no travel across the seven seas in the ancient past, because there was a prohibition against it. I have not found anything of the sort in ancient India. In fact, the Rig Veda mentions not only 100 old boats, but it mentions the technical names of, say, something like an oar. An oar was called an aritra, a sailor was called an aritri, and a flotilla of boats was called a dyumna. So there are all kinds of these technical terms for navigation through waters mentioned in the Rig Veda. And I do hope you know that the word navigation itself comes from the Sanskrit word navik. That's how you can, if you go to Wikipedia, it will trace the word to a Latin word, but that Latin word can be traced to a Sanskrit cognate, and it comes from the word navik. So you have, were you asking me something?
Yeah, in fact, I was just adding that I always used to wonder that how did Adi Shankaracharya travel across India in 24 years? And it is when I was listening to one of the talks in our Yatra conference that I figured out that he was also traveling on the waterways.
Yes.
So right
Yes.
from Kerala going up to Omkareshwar in Madhya Pradesh, to upwards, to all nooks and corners, he was primarily using waterways to travel.
You are talking about Adi Shankaracharya in the turn of the first millennium CE.
Right, right.
We talk about Tholkappiyar,
Right.
who lived in 2,300 years ago.
Right.
And Tholkappiyar was from Kanchipuram.
Right.
But he went to Salatura to study with the biggest sages of the day. So how did he travel? He used the riverways. Then from the riverways he came onto the roadways, and he followed that roadway, the Dakshin Path. Then when it caught the Uttar Path, and then he went up again. Maybe it would be a good idea to just show the Dakshin Path and the Uttar Path, and you can see, if you look at these two, if you look at this map, that there are also a number of rivers shown, and all rivers are navigable, and all the roadways have capillary roads which lead to the ports which are there on the eastern coast as well as on the western coast. But when we do a section, a program on just the trade routes, we will focus more on this aspect.
So they had waterways, they knew how to make boats, they knew how to make big boats, which would be something like our cruise ships today.
Yes.
They had
And
roads. So when
also, they also knew how to make pleasure boats. Like I was saying, in the
right,
Arthashastra, the idea of going off on a pleasure cruise in a pleasure boat is often mentioned. It's given as one of the biggest It's like a treat which is given to you. If you do something good, if a minister does something good, then the king gives him a pleasure cruise on the river. So they also made beautiful pleasure boats.
I think we saw a glimpse of it in Bahubali.
Yes, and in Urnabhi too, the sequel, you are going to see another glimpse of it, because I am going to describe a pleasure boat in great detail.
Great. So tell me, what were so when they did travel on road, what were the kind of vehicles? They obviously did not have the BMWs and the Volvos and even Marutis. So
Yes.
what were the vehicles that they used?
Yes. So, of course, our 2 feet,
Hmm.
as in college we used to call it bus number 11, those two
Right,
feet have always been there.
right.
But other than 2 feet, we have also always used animals. Horses spring naturally to the mind, oxen, then you have camels, then you also have goats. It surprises me how did people use goats, but these are some of the smallest and the roughest and the toughest paths could be navigated by goats. So they were laden with small stuff, not really very huge bundles, but as much as goats could carry. And these goat paths were the smallest and the most rudimentary of paths. So apart from animals, just animals, you also had ox carts. And you can show an image of the ox cart, which is very commonly found in the Indus Valley
Yes,
civilization.
yes,
We have
yes.
lots and lots of ox carts, and lots of toy ox carts which have been found, so that we know that they were very much in use. And those ox carts were, if you were a poor person or just a average person, then you just had a normal wooden cart with two oxen pulling it. Now suppose you were a rich man or a rich woman, so then you had that ox cart. It had a cover on top like an arch.
Mhm,
Then it would have samel stuffed cushions at the bottom, covered with silk, and
mhm,
it would have beautiful parda,
mhm,
again made of, with bolsters inside. So you traveled in luxury if you
mhm.
were a rich person who could afford this kind of ox cart. So, well, they were the BMWs of the day, Anuradha.
Yes, yes,
these, these ox carts.
yes.
And other than ox carts, of course, you had chariots.
Mhm,
And these chariots were mostly in the context of fighting, armies moving, because chariots were not used for any kind of fun activity. They were also not used for trade. For trade activities, it was mostly pack animals, and for people, it was these bullock carts. So this is as far as the vehicles are concerned. And then also the palanquins, the dolis,
yes.
which were carried by people.
But
So these,
primarily the women's privilege.
well, no, primarily the rich person's privilege. Rich person, because in ancient India, these palanquins were used by both men and women, and they were more a mark of prestige, because you could afford to have four people carrying you on their shoulders. So they were used both by men and women, but not for very, very, very long distances. For that, it was always the carts, the bullock carts, where those large caravans moved. And when there were women and children also in those caravans, they were always bullock carts.
So that brings me to the next question. Today, wherever we travel, we have hotels, resorts, restaurants, uh, all kinds of luxuries. You can just click and book and go and stay and be pampered. Uh, so, where did people stay when they were traveling, given that they used to travel in a slow mode, which means their travels took multiple days, if not months together? So, where did they stay on the way? And where did they stay once they reached the destination? Did the destinations have something, some equivalent of a hotel?
Before I go on to that, I must mention that these vehicles traveled on roads.
Right.
But so these roads were a feature of the Indus Valley civilization, a feature of our Vedic civilization, and a feature of later historical periods also. Even if we look at the Rigvedic references, roads were made slightly raised so that bullock carts could pass on them. Trees were planted on both sides of those roads, and there are so many names and so many types of roads. So if you read, for example, Panini is a grammarian, but he's of great help to us in everything, us historians, because he has mentioned so many of the normal average things that were there in the social life of the day, and we can use that also as a source for understanding that time. So starting from this Ajapathika, which was only for goats, as I mentioned, he talks about Devpath, Hanspath, Stalpath, Karipath, Rajpath, and Shankhapath. It's I don't have the time to go into all of them, but they are basically in increasing order of importance and increasing order of ease of travel. You can make out, that a Rajpath or a Devpath will be something very good. So roads were made, repaired, constructed, and they were taken care of very carefully. There was always there was a whole team, infrastructural team in place to look at whether the road was in good repair, to look at whether the trees were okay or not, and whether passing on it was easy or not. And along these roads were those guest houses that you are talking of. These guest houses are mentioned in the Rig Veda. These guest houses are mentioned by Panini. These guest houses are mentioned in the Arthashastra. They are also mentioned in Jatak tales. They are, in fact, for the Mauryans, the guest house was a very important thing that they had started making in a very on a very large scale, which means that they built many guest houses, and they built many milestones to make it easier for people to travel along these. So what were these rest houses called? Some, I'll give you a few words. The Athar Ved mentions a guest house called Avsat. Then you have something called Prathama or Prapat, which was the name for a guest house in the Rig Veda. What amenities did these guest houses offer you? So we have many stories about what people did when they were traveling. They had to stop at night and they stayed at this guest house. So apparently there was very good food and drink available at these guest houses. These were run mostly by the state. Whoever was the king, they were run by the state, and these were available to the people who were staying there. Wells, tanks were dug if this was not next to a river, so you had very good water sources. You could also stay there for the night very comfortably. You would be taken care of, food, drink. You can make merry because there would be other travelers, and then you could depart the next day. So these guest houses had a lot of facilities. If you think that I'm talking about a period 2000, 2500 years ago, they had a lot of facilities very similar to the kind of things we look for today. The other places which functioned like guest houses were also ashrams. So these ashrams welcomed travelers, and they took full care of these travelers. We have so many stories of travelers, including rishis and munis. Remember the ashram of Kanva, where because of a certain traveling rishi, Shakuntala was cursed. Because of a certain traveling king, her entire life was changed. So ashrams also served as guest houses. And most importantly, Anuradha, each person, each person's house was in a way a guest house, because Atithya was very important. So if there was nothing around and you were there near a village where there was no guest house, people in that village would take care of you very warmly. They would take care of you as if you were part of their family, or even more important. So that Atithya made it very easy for people to get shelter at night. But suppose all these things were not available, then people also camped out in the open. For example, these big caravans in which people used to travel together. Then these caravans would stop at a place. Either you would sleep in your own bullock cart, or you would make some kind of bed under a tree. This was not very safe. So remember, all this was not very idyllic. There were many dangers. There were many dangers of robbers, highwaymen, animals, Then, if you lit fires, then those fires would sometimes get out of control. And our stories are full of incidents which happen in such cases. When people are staying outside at night, something or the other happens and a whole story begins because of that. But while on the subject of roads, I had promised that I would mention the Ramayana. So there is a prasang in the Ramayana when Sri Ram leaves for his exile, and Bharat comes back to Ayodhya and discovers that his brother is gone. So he decides to follow his brother immediately and to bring him back to Ayodhya. So he starts off with the entire army of Ayodhya. Now, when I was reading the Valmiki Ramayana, I felt that this whole description of the army, how the army moved, how the roads were made, what they ate, what they did, was a bit of a distraction for me, because I wanted Bharat to reach Sri Ram. But in the context of today, I can tell you that it is an excellent detailed description of how roads were dug, maintained, repaired, and created. So there was a whole what can I say, army of people to do it. There was a huge labor force. You had topographers, you had surveyors, masons, engineers, carpenters, diggers, tree planters, builders of huts, etc. And one special person I must mention, category, I mean guides. These guides were very, very important for traveling in unknown areas. And even the known areas, you had this road, okay, this path is going in front of you. But on both sides were dangerous places, which were forests, sometimes deep forests, where anything and anyone could emerge. If the roads were a little narrow, you could get lost. So guides were always needed. And the head of the caravans, who was called the Sartvahak, was normally a person who was an expert in this. There was always a set of guides traveling with these caravans and with people. But the head of this, the caravan, the Sartvahak, had to be an expert in this. So when you read the Valmiki Ramayana next, read this prasang, and you will get a technical description of how roads were prepared and how armies used to travel on them. So path and different kinds of small and big paths have been mentioned everywhere, and they are, of course, central to travel, because if you don't have a road, no matter what vehicle you have or what animal you have, it's not going to be easy to travel. It's going to become very difficult for anyone to actually,
because we, in those days, it used to be a dense forested area through which people traveled, and not the urbanized area like we have today. So that brings me to next question. Did women travel in ancient India?
yes, women traveled in ancient India in various ways. I have talked about one of the reasons for traveling being trade.
Right.
Now, for trade, many of the merchants who traded moved with their entire families, because it was not a matter of a day or two. If a person was traveling, from Ujjain to Patliputra, and in my next book, you are going to read about Saudagar who travels from Ujjain to Patliputra and what happens to him and his wife. So they go with their families because it takes a very long time to come and go. So then women traveled in that sense. Then women were also scholars. So they traveled for the sake of knowledge like anybody else. Women were also in the Natya Mandalis. So of course they traveled for the sake of their theater performances, etc. And there is a very special category of the solo woman traveler, as we have discussed and you've told me so many times, being in touch with the trends of today, that solo traveling by women apparently is quite a thing nowadays.
Right. Everybody kind of flaunts it, although I don't know if we are ever solo. Even in this isolated time, we are not really solo. We are all conversing and talking and connected. Yeah.
So, but there is a special category of knowledge seekers who become completely free like the wind. They are supposed to, join the free flow of nature, and they become absolutely swatantra travelers. So some women became knowledge seekers like that. We have the example of Sulabha from, again, that wonderful dialogue between Raja Janak and Sulabha in the Mahabharata. And then we have the example of Madhavi, Yayati's daughter, who after a very long, checkered and adventurous life, finally became a traveler like this. So what did these women do? They drifted around the entire country, or the whatever, wherever they wanted to go, in search of self-realization, in search of knowledge. So sometimes they met people, but it is said, their descriptions tell us that they were at one with nature and with the animals who lived in nature. So these were solo travelers, but they were a very different category of solo travelers who were very serious about reaching moksha. I am sure today, I mean,
Today.
super robots of the world, maybe they, whatever, they travel for self-realization. But this was a little more serious, because the pursuit of moksha is very different from the new age self-realization that people like to talk of.
But it would be still like absolute nomad, not belonging to any one place.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not belonging to any one place, not staying anywhere, even for more than one night. And they would also wear clothes which are made of leaves and bark. So they were at one with nature. They would cut off their societal ties, etc., and only simply pursue knowledge, gyan, moksha. That's all. I am very fascinated by this description. I'm writing another book, as you know, The Modern Women of Ancient India, and I'm going to write about the life of Madhavi, Yayati's daughter. She had a really checkered life, and perhaps an exploited one. But at the end of it all, she decided to become this kind of free traveler who travels and becomes one with the world. So I find that description absolutely fascinating and moving. It's travel with a purpose and yet not with a purpose. The purpose is not this worldly, it is otherworldly. The purpose is moksha.
Yes. In fact, a lot of literature on pilgrimage also talks about something very similar, where you should travel solo, you should be very focused on what you are traveling for not engage with anything, anybody, and travel. And that's why probably we had the most sacred spaces were remote and not reachable by common person. So you
Yes.
had to make that amount of effort to reach them, but that's a conversation for another day. Now I'm going to be greedy and ask you one more thing, and which is, if I have to read about travels in ancient India and I can't read as much as you read, then what are the one or two books that I should read?
All right, then I think I would recommend Moti Chandra's Trade and Trade Routes.
Okay.
It's a book which is a little dated, and he goes too much into descriptions and justifications of the Aryan invasion theory, which sound really sorry if you, I mean, if you read it from today's context. But otherwise, he has very good information on all aspects of travel. And I myself refer to Moti Chandra a lot. He has written other books also on travel, but this is a good one to give you a general idea of what travel was like. Then, if you would like to just read a little bit of history, then read Upinder Singh. In her books on history, her book on ancient India, she has written a lot about travel. Then read Nayanjot Lahiri.
Right.
Her work on trade routes is perhaps the best in India.
Right.
But that's it's a little tough. So maybe, one day, Anuradha, we can do a focused program on the kind of things that historians write about these trade routes, and we can study the work of Lahiri and Upinder Singh. Moti Chandra is very easy to read. I think that would be the one book that I would recommend to the people who are listening to this, and it's available on Amazon on Kindle.
Great.
So you can order it right now also if you want.
Yes, so I'm going to definitely read that. So great. I guess we've had you for the day, but I'm going to come back to you for trade routes. I'm going to come back to you for women travelers, and I'm sure there will be multiple other themes that we can talk about. But that is good for today. And thank you so much for coming over. This has been long, long overdue. And we look forward to having you again.
Radha, when we discussed it first, I was working in Rome 2 years ago.
Right.
That was when we discussed it for the first time. So I'm glad we did it. Thank you for calling me. And we had a wonderful discussion. I hope to continue it.
Great. Thank you and namaste, Sumedha ji.